Welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Today, we're doing a flipped podcast in honor of the Ancient One, Phil,
Yay!
or more specifically, in honor of his 39th birthday, which will be this week. That means that I, Pat, will be hosting, which is weird and hopefully entertaining to you. As you can see, we've dressed in matching M90 hoodies in celebration of the joyous day. This is like matching pajamas, but for airsofters.
Yeah.
So, just a little bit of fun there. Really, this is largely because I knew he'd love an M90 hoodie, and he and John are slowly corrupting me.
And he was not wrong on either score.
Oh, that's good. So, our big theme for today, other than Pat, you're checking your notes a lot. What can you do? Is how was the season? All right. So on our last episode, Phil asked me sort of what I thought about my season. We talked a bit about the fact that, health issues notwithstanding, I probably got more success out of teching guns than I really got out of playing this year. But that I had a lot of fun when I did go play. So I'll put it in the win column. Yeah. We're going to do sort of the same thing for Phil. I'm a terrible person. I went back to our first episode of this Airsoft season. How'd the game go? How are you feeling about Airsoft? And so I'm going to ask Phil some questions based on what he said then.
A researched podcast host. That's always dangerous.
Well, you asked the researcher to do things. We came up with this idea together because we thought it'd be a chuckle. So. Yeah. One of the things you bring up really early in that episode is you talk about having gone to an evening game and not having done that in a really long time. Mm-hmm. So my first question, because I actually don't remember, is did you go to any more? Or was it just the one?
Yeah, no, I did. I went to a second one. I think one of the things ultimately that killed that sort of for me is just logistically it's difficult. Where I live, it's not nearby.
Yeah. It's substantial driving to do after work.
Yeah, exactly. And so it was fun to do a couple of times, but between that and juggling all the other things I had, that I have going on, it just became really challenging to just keep doing that. And then on top of that, be like, oh yeah, well, I'm giving up my Thursday night, but then I'm also giving up my Saturday afternoon if I want to play that week as well. And one of the things that I'm sure this will come up again is I've spent a lot of time this summer really focusing on my running and making sure that I was, getting all my runs done correctly, because I had some really lofty running goals this year as well. And that, I'm not going to say took a toll, but it certainly meant that I didn't have I wasn't flush with energy, let's call it.
Yeah. One of the rough realities of being an airsofter in, our late 30s, all joking about Phil being ancient aside, my 39th birthday is literally 2 weeks after his. So, mm-hmm. Is that we have on increasingly more adult responsibilities and less free time. And it's just sort of all right, I feel like the answer is just playing twice a week is ambitious for
definitely
people with our level of stuff on the go, right? Teaching is not super forgiving to your evenings, which, I've mentioned before and people know. And you have a wife and, a small farm essentially going on outside the house.
Yeah.
And the running and other interests. So there's, it's not that we don't love airsoft. It's just that we do occasionally need to sleep.
Yeah, and I think with respect to the evening games too, I didn't find yes, it was a different vibe, but they were meaningfully different. And I just preferred to play in the daytime with a bit of a larger crowd on the weekends. So that's ultimately where
more humans is good. For me, I've had LASIK, so I basically can't see in the dark. Mm-hmm. If there's not illumination around, I'm useless. So for me, it was just I fall down enough on my own time.
Yeah. And then, the other thing I would add on top of that is just you guys weren't playing. right? And like one of my big things is I want to play when the boys are playing, right? I
Totally.
want to play COD with the boys, as they say.
Yeah. I mean,
So
like we
like
didn't start a team to not play together,
exactly.
right?
So
Like,
I think John might have been to. So like ultimately, it's like it's more fun to just go with as many people as I can on Saturdays. Where I
yeah,
landed with that. Yeah.
that makes sense to me. And I thought that was the case, but like I actually wasn't certain.
Hmm.
Like I know as the summer went on, and like you were training for races and like looking after chickens and stuff, it was definitely that your focus was like not on airsoft, but like once a week is good kind of thing.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think just to touch on that, I think there's lots of people who, because I know like the demographics of the people who listen to our content, who watch our content, and for the most part, firstly, all of our stuff on Airsoft on YouTube is marked 18 plus, right? So you're talking to adults, and realistically, we have a huge swath of our listeners who are in the like 25 to 30 years old, 30 plus, and then even older than that, and all of those people, you're gonna have juggling like priorities. Like that's gonna be a real thing. And it's not that, because I really did feel that way sometimes, where it's like, well, I'm only playing airsoft once every couple of weeks. Like, is that enough? And in fact, on the Discord, a couple of weeks ago, someone was saying, well, like, I'm thinking about selling all my airsoft gear because I haven't played in like a year. And it's like, well, I think people create this false, especially if you're consuming all your content, your airsoft content on like YouTube and like social media and stuff. People get this impression that in order to really play airsoft successfully, you have to be out there every single week. And I don't think that that's accurate. If you're having fun, and this is the advice we gave this guy a couple of weeks ago, which was that, listen, keep your stuff, because you'll never know when you're going to want to come back, or you want to go play a game, and then you have the stuff. It's not costing you. Obviously, if it's a financial situation, it's a conversation. But like if it's just taking up space, well, hang on to it, and who knows, right? Because even like guys like in Australia and stuff, like they're playing airsoft once a year. That's good enough for them. I mean, they'd love to play more. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure,
yeah,
but
and
like
like
it is playing airsoft.
yeah, and
All
like
airsoft is
speaking
good airsoft.
totally, and like speaking from like my own just literally coming off the season here, going, man, I wish I'd gotten to play more. Health issues suck. Like that's not me going, oh, I should have played every week. Like
Yeah.
it's my hunger to play airsoft this season is not satiated, and the season is over, which is I
Hmm.
think a very different feeling from like, oh, like I haven't played in a year. But I mean, several of our guys have literally like this season gotten back in after long absences. It turns out that the first couple of years of having a kid, they take up a lot of time, and that you
Yeah.
don't have as many available options. Other people, it's work stuff. Like this is a really fun hobby. It's a great sport, but like real life stuff is real life stuff.
Yeah.
But don't beat yourself up for like not getting to play as much as you'd like, other than in the sense of like, oh, do I need to revise priorities? Where can I revise priorities to get to play more if you feel like you want to play more?
Yeah. Totally. Totally.
So having talked about that, so this was your first season really fully committed to the HPA pain train,
Yeah.
for good or ill. So I guess first up, you mentioned at the beginning of the season that like between playing with my gear and a bit of Steph's gear and stuff, you'd gotten a feel that you probably were okay with the line and the tank and everything. Now that you've got your own and you've made adjustments to it over the season, how do you think you feel?
Oh,
Me
hey,
English
going
good.
back to AEG. Yeah.
I mean, that is an answer. I'd be surprised if that was your response, but it's not impossible.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. I did. There's a lot to love about. So there's a lot to love about the Kythera in particular. The mechanical trigger on the Kythera is awesome. It's feedback that I really enjoy. I like the way that it feels. I was having a conversation about this with someone on Instagram, um, a couple weeks ago, talking about like, oh well, it's not the same feedback as an AEG. I miss the thwack of the piston and stuff, and I'm like, I absolutely don't care about that kind of stuff. Because they're like, oh well, sometimes you can't feel if your replica is dry firing or whatever, and it's like, yeah, but it's different. And once you get accustomed to it, you get accustomed to the quirks and the differences. It's not as bad. So I think from that aspect, like the stuff to like about the Kythera, I mean, I like a lot. I like the mechanical trigger. I like the simplicity of the system. I like that. If I need to open it for whatever reason, it's not going to like fly apart at me. Like I'd have to go chasing a spring, across my garage or whatever.
You don't have to
So
worry
that,
about, like one of the issues you were having substantially with the AEGs was, the motor giving you trouble.
Yeah,
Right?
100%. Yeah. And also like compression issues, like in terms of, oh, well, my my spring isn't where it needs to be and the piston and blah, blah, blah. And with this, it's just like tune the reg and you where you need to be. Like all of that stuff was awesome. It has been awesome. And, I can't stress enough how much I like that. The line does introduce new challenges. And just an example I was thinking about just even the other day when I was like thinking about, well, the season and blah blah blah. I remember distinctly crawling on the boardwalk on the swamp side of the field, which, as you know, is not great. Like it's not smooth, and
No.
my line got
Never
caught
has
on
been.
something. And yeah, so I didn't realize that. So I was coming up I was prone, I was crawling along, really trying to avoid fire. And my intent was I'm going to get to the end of the walkway, which opens up. And from there, I'll very quickly be able to get into a shooting position and start firing from prone. So I did. Great. Brought my my replica up on target. I acquired side picture, pulled the trigger, nothing happened. Because my line had gotten tangled and disconnected. And I didn't realize that as I was crawling because I was like really focused on sort of what I was doing, keep my head down, et cetera, et cetera. Point is, that's a thing I didn't have to think about before, but that happened relatively early on in the season. So then I just built this mechanism to every now and then when I did something, let's call it non-standard, I would just make sure, am I still connected? Is everything still good? Right?
Yeah, it adds
2 seconds to look down and see if my line is still plugged into my gun. And if so, then you're off to the races, right?
Yeah, and like speaking from my own experience, like that's a check you can do in your workspace too, right? Like
Totally. So it's just until it happens to you, I guess you're not aware that it can happen. And then once it does, you're like, oh, right, this duh.
Yep.
So that part has been fine. I also, like I went from the aluminum tank that I was using before. That's the alu tank you got me for my birthday last year.
Yep.
And then I upgraded it to a carbon fiber tank, so a CF tank, a much bigger tank that I got through Jeremy, and that has been great. It weighs about the same, but the volume is huge. And now I'm looking back and being like, I don't necessarily know if I really need all that volume. My thinking about it was that I really wanted a larger tank because I shoot a lot, which is true. However, I don't shoot that much, right? When you consider how much air the Kythera consumes per shot and how many shots are in a tank, it's a lot.
And like I've definitely running the Kythera, I definitely have had a couple of games where I got like a little lower than I would like on air. Using that tank, like when the season that I ran that tank plus the Kythera. But mostly that could have been resolved by like, it was like play a long game, play a third long game, and I could have literally, while I was reloading the magazine between any of those games, refilled the tank.
Yeah.
I think like I also courtesy Jeremy ended up with a CF tank, and like I think it's extremely useful for me, but that's largely because it meets the needs of the LMG, and like the other tank was absolutely meeting the needs of the fusion engine in the M27. But like, on the upside, I can fill in the morning and I can play for 8 hours with the fusion engine and just be like, yeah, whatever, it's fine.
Yeah.
So
I mean, those are new considerations for me and stuff that I haven't really thought about or had to think about. Now I'm looking at, okay, well, do I want a smaller tank and maybe I can get away with it? Probably can for like 3 hours of open games if we were to do longer scenarios. If other teams want to organize a scenario, then probably happy to have the bigger tank. And then also how I carry all that stuff. I've been thinking about like, do I want to keep carrying it in backpack, or like should I transition to a belt kit? And from a belt kit, like I could carry the tank like on the back, horizontally, like Cal does with his Tipman sort of situation.
Yep.
Again, these are things that I'm toying with, but fundamentally it comes from the point of view that I'm satisfied with HPA, excuse me. I'm not planning on doing anything other than that in the future. Just not having to deal with the motor and the piston, the gearbox, like all this kind of stuff is a huge relief for me. Yeah, and it makes it easier to service my own stuff as well, right?
Yeah, like one of the things that you mentioned previously that like seems to still be the case is, that you were much less stressed about cracking this open than Definitely. An AEG. And like I think I'd guess that part of that is, like nothing's under compression, and there's no like if you lose 2 shims, you're not like shit. Now I have to redo a chunk of work or call Pat and be like, hey Pat, come redo this chunk of work for me because I don't want to deal with it.
Yeah, and I find like, I was looking up a video on how to like take apart an airsoft reg, and like that's not and here maybe is the difference. A gearbox to me with the motor and stuff, that feels like a toy, right?
Yep.
An air compression regulator is not a toy. It is not built to toy standards. It is built to real world standards.
Yeah, because
right?
if it's built to bad standards, it blows up, and they can't have that, right? Like,
yeah, and I mean, it needs to be, like especially for larger tanks, like the CF tank that I have. I think you have the same one. They need to be hydro certified and all this kind of stuff, hydrostatic certified. Like, there are real world certifications and standards around all of these things, and so as a consequence of that, I find that I'm less concerned about the fiddly bits because they don't feel like toys, at least as far as the regulators, the tanks and stuff are concerned. The Kythera, I mean, obviously it is more like toy-esque, but it's still like it has a different vibe, right? Than this thing has a plastic tappet plate inside. Do you know what I mean? Like it's that. Yeah. So that's where my mindset shift, I guess, is.
Like I've only played with Polar Star and Wolverine engines, but I've played with 3 of the 4 Polar Star ones now. Mm-hmm. And like the HPA engines are definitely different than AEGs, but yeah, I feel like once you get settled into and used to them, they're not any harder to work on. I'd actually argue quite the opposite. Like, one of the nice things with the Kythera, with the Fusion engine, with the F2 is that, like, if something does go wrong with the engine itself, often it's a matter of like open it, clean it, lube it, put it back together.
Yeah.
And if it's more than that, it's almost certainly just 1 or 2 O-rings. No problem.
Yeah.
Right? And compared to some of the frustrations of diagnosing like especially a really upgraded AEG, it's like, oh, yeah, this is pretty chill. Like,
yeah, definitely.
Taking apart the reg the first time was scary because it's like, oh, it's a $200 thing and I don't know what's inside it. Like, I'm looking at a diagram on the computer screen, but like, and it's like, oh, it's O-rings. It's O-rings, machine pieces of metal, and like there are a couple of in the in the one that I'm using by Redline, it's just like, oh yeah, this is like 6 O-rings, a bunch of pieces of machine metal. There's one screw that's like, yeah, don't cross thread this or it'll mess up the thing because it's very fine. And it's like, okay, I can do that.
Yeah.
So it, like, I won't say it's idiot proof, but like the learning curve seems nicer so far.
And especially the other thing too is the power source, right? Like, batteries are fiddly, batteries are finicky. You have to charge your lipos in a lipo bag because you don't want them to catch fire and all this kind of stuff. And it's not to say that there's no risk associated with high pressure air. Obviously there is, otherwise they wouldn't require hydrostatic testing and all this kind of stuff. But it's much simpler and it's much more user serviceable, right? If your lipo battery gets puffy, you have one recourse. You have to dispose of it, right?
Yep.
One of the first times I had my new CF tank at Frontline, it was leaking. It wouldn't hold air. And the Frontline outdoor manager, Mike Keats, came over. He's like, oh, it's a leaking tank. Let's see if I got the parts to fix that. And he did, because the O-rings are standard,
yep.
Right? Like, it's real, quote unquote, like it's big boy equipment. Same thing with filling the tank. Like, I can fill my CF tank off of my brother's scuba tank, because it's real world stuff. Like, there's cross compatibility. It's not like a toy. So I'm belaboring the point, but I think there's no real world where I take my AEG gearbox that I still have and I'm like, yeah, you know what, I'm putting that back in. Like, that's not going to happen. All my work now is going to be on fine tuning, making sure that I get that nozzle alignment finally taken care of, at least this winter, so it's perfect alignment. Make sure that my outer barrel gets stabilized, maybe chopped down to a smaller barrel. I have a redacted amount of money to spend on plumbing coming up, so that's something. But barring any other unforeseens, I'd like to maybe chop down the barrel so it's not quite as long. I think that might also be helpful overall for the system. Anyways, point is, there's stuff to do, but it's all going to be HPA at least for the foreseeable future.
Which is to me pretty satisfying.
Yeah,
I'll
definitely.
admit to finding that gratifying. I found it really cool, and I'm glad that you are too. Because I'm not actually sure it came up. So you had to put a metering screw in it, and that solved your feeding issues because you were
Yes.
struggling with that.
Yeah. I had to use the absolute slowest metering screw that they have, and when I did that, problem resolved. So
Great. So yeah, I mean, that's both the end of that teching story, which was much earlier in the year, really. But I don't think we ever actually came back to it, so I figured it would be reasonable to talk that in here.
And people are like, oh well, with the metering screw, your rate of fire gets lower, your potential rate of fire gets lower, which is true, but not in any sort of meaningful capacity. For I'm not going to be even shooting semi-auto with my trigger, just going click 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 as fast as I can. I still
if you're trying to use a Kythera to do sort of get one of the longer double tap triggers or something because you're doing speed soft, I'd encourage you to probably put an electrical engine in your gun. I think they're probably better for that, but also I'm not sure that's the design intent as such.
No.
So
and that fixed it, and I haven't had any issues with rate of fire or anything since.
Solid. And I have the feeling, the impression, I guess, that compared to where your AEG was at reliability wise, that you're having a lot more of a yes, you need to tinker with, and have been putting off maybe tinkering with the nozzle alignment, but that you're in a much better I'm hitting what I'm shooting at kind of place.
Yeah, definitely. I get way more because of the nozzle alignment issues. I get shots that drop, or I get a flyer when I don't really want to, or whatever. But overall, I can put BBs where they need to go, and I've been pretty successful the last several games that I played this season, just hitting even the one game that I played a couple weeks ago with my bruise before my bruised rib sort of kicked in. I shot Kirby from, it wasn't very far away, actually blew his goggles off his face, beside the point. They broke, so fair play.
There's nothing you can do about that other than yikes.
Yeah, but and again, that was on target. I wasn't aiming at his head, I was aiming just in his, in the general vicinity of his body, and I got him on target, so no concerns there. So yeah, that's not something that I'm worried about anymore. The feeding issue is resolved, which is the main thing. When you pull the trigger, you want a BB to come out, whether it's perfect, right? Whether it's perfect or not, at least if something comes out, you're ideally putting something downrange at the very, very least, even if it's not super accurate. But yeah, it's been good since then.
Excellent. Yes, some of that I knew, but it's good to have everyone caught up, as it were. You also picked up a substantially fancier, i.e. much more real steel, red dot, fairly close to the beginning of the season. And I know initially you hadn't really dialed it in much. You hadn't played with zeroing it beyond just it's good enough. How are you finding that after a season of running it?
It's really funny because I don't think about it, and that tells me that it's good.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's not a factor.
It has never become a problem. Great.
Yeah. Replica comes up on target. I have no trouble acquiring my dot. I have no trouble acquiring my dot from either eye. There's no parallax, right? So when my dot is on target, if my rifle is moving around, the dot is staying where it needs to. The adjustments that I did make, for just a left-right adjustment, up-down adjustment, this kind of stuff, very, very slight. It's been pretty good, just bang on the rail. But yeah, it's been great. I think the dot is nice and bright. I've had no issues whatsoever. And I did like the field of view on the previous dot. I did like that wider one. But man, this one is so clear. Yep. It's so clear, so tack sharp. I don't think about it. All I have is a dot in my field of vision, and it's the dot itself too is a lot crisper, more fine, I think, than the red dot on the previous red dot, which again I loved. I love that SRS, but this one truly is
in the other room attached to one of my guns. It's a great airsoft red dot.
Yeah, but I like this, and if I'd known that I would like it as much as I do, I probably would have picked one up sooner.
and
If you know
like,
what I mean.
totally. I mean, one of the things I find really interesting, just from Saturday, is I was playing with two guns that are mounting probably the two best airsoft magnified optics that our team has ever had. A Trijicon, or not, Elcan Spectre. There we go. Not
Yeah.
And a zoom, like fairly substantial zoom scope that was like, yeah, this is actually like very good for airsoft. And after, because it ended up taking the M27 out during that day, when I got home, I was like, just compare it, like sort of like, I wonder how much better is this? Is this better? Am I crazy? And I was like, nope.
Yeah, it might even be worth doing like a video at some point to showcase just exactly, like this is the best airsoft replica you can get, that you can get your hands on, and this is what not too much more expensive, LPVO can look like, and it is substantial. The clarity of the glass is really what makes a difference, and you wouldn't think that'd be relevant on a red dot, but it is and it isn't. It's not it, because I guess the way that I would say is like, it's, if everything is working well with it and it's perfect, you're not even thinking about it. Whereas if your glass is a little murky, it's like, oh, what is that I'm looking at? Or the dot will sort of spread or ghost out a little bit and obscure your point of aim.
I mean, it's one of those things where
yeah,
I feel like if the $100 model was as good for all applications as the $200 or $300 model, the $200 or $300 or $700 model probably wouldn't exist.
Yeah.
But it's weird to be looking at that from, and like, they're probably the last thing you should spend a ton of money on for airsoft. Like, they're really not like the first thing you should have a crack at. I have played very effectively for a very long time with airsoft red dots.
Yeah, exactly.
With airsoft, with one of both. I've run both of the magnified optics that I was playing with on Saturday, right? Like, I've owned both of them. So don't take it as like, oh, go get one immediately and it will solve all your problems. But like, it's starting to feel like it's a good capstone piece for your kit.
Definitely. And I mean, like 2006 to 2023, right? Like, that's what, 17 years?
Yep.
Like, treat yourself, right? At some point, you're like, you know what? You've been playing long enough with the cheapo stuff. Maybe you get something more expensive and see how it works.
It's not like
in my case.
No, we're going to still be doing this in a couple of years, right? So,
for one thing, and then the other thing I would add is like, it's really not that expensive in the grand scheme of things. You got like crazy people going out there dropping 4 or 5 digits on like NVGs or thermals. You can afford to try, if you can afford thermals or an NVG, you can probably afford a real deal red dot that will help you, more in your day games and stuff.
For sure. And like, one of the things that I would add to that is, especially if you're in Canada, like this becomes slightly different if you're in another country. But in Canada, with the price point that a reasonable airsoft replica is at, if you're like, oh man, I want my third or fourth gun to put on the wall and like cycle through, I definitely have one gun worth of LPVO, and I definitely am happy with that purchase.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have, at no point since I bought the LPVO have I considered taking it off the gun other than to loan it to Phil, and exclusively to Phil. Like, all others need not apply, or cleaning it. Like, it just, I have never considered selling it. I've never considered switching. I have slightly considered, because I'm a lunatic, buying like a $200 reflex red dot and putting it on the rails and just having both, because that might be worthwhile. I don't know, but also because I'm crazy.
Yeah, probably a little bit of both.
Yeah, totally, right? But like, no, me likey, that stays. So like, going from there, one of the frustrations you were having, and like, you actually brought it up because you were saying you'd been talking to someone about it recently, but I definitely got to a point where, and it was a practice thing because it changed the tone that I was looking for, but I definitely am long past the point where I can tell when it's dry firing now with a HPA gun that's in my hands. You had expressed that like at the beginning of the season you were sort of like about that. And I mean, fixing the feeding issues means it's probably dealt with in that way anyway, but can you pick up the tone now?
Definitely. Yeah, no question. And again, like you just said, fixing the feeding issue definitely address that too, because I know when it should be dry firing, right? I know when roughly, when I should be coming up on MT or when I've been shooting a lot or whatever. So I also know when to listen for it. It was only frustrating in the context of I have a full mag. Is it going to shoot, or is it shooting, or is it not shooting? But now, like, I have a good sense of when that's happening, picking up the shots and stuff. So yeah, that's really not a factor anymore.
For sure. And like mostly I was curious just on a like, you mentioned it earlier and listener interest
Yeah, yeah.
maybe. I know you also at the beginning of the season were playing with a weapon light, and like partly broken that out for the evening games of the outdoor, which we already talked about. But I know one
Yeah.
of the reasons you were playing with it was that you and John were talking about bringing them to Iron Horse as
Yeah.
like a utility tool. But I also know that you haven't gamed it much this season, other than
No.
at those games, because I mean you're playing during the day, and there's no indoor dark area really on the frontline field during the day, so I guess don't need it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny, like I was out in the garage not yesterday, a couple days ago. And I mean, it was just there with my airsoft kit, and I took it out because I'm like, oh, I don't need this for whatever I was doing. And I was like, man, I really haven't used that a whole lot this year. Like, it's come to with me to a lot of games, but it never in my kit, but it's never really made its way onto my replica and stuff. And I think part of the reason why we were looking at the weapon light is for the Iron Horse and all this kind of stuff. And I'm not sure whether or not it's actually going to be something I keep on my replica at all times or not. But yeah, I haven't really done much with it, and I don't know if I will or not. Fundamentally, for Iron Horse, I don't think we're planning on any night games. For one thing, because we're foreign nationals, we're not allowed to use any NVG equipment, right?
Yep, that'd be an important factor.
Nor are any Americans legally allowed to instruct us on how to use them, because again, foreign nationals. Fair enough. And so I don't
weird things to think about, but like,
I mean, and ITAR is a thing, right? So
it totally makes sense. It's just sort of like,
yeah. And so I'm not. Firstly, I'm not going to do anything illegal. Number one, because I'm way too much of a rules follower for that. But also number two, I don't necessarily want to play my very first big milsim game and then play a night game and then go up against people who own the night, and I'm just there basically being op4 for them. Poor little op4 guy with a white light, just like getting schwacked. Like that's not fun. What is going to be a lot more fun is we're probably going to do just a big barbecue, and like all the Stormriders Foreign Legion and stuff are going to get together, have some beers, have some burgers or ribs or whatever it is they do down south. Todd is going to figure that out.
All of the above.
Yeah, but so I think that's likely where it's going to be. Now, I might want to have one in case we do end up going into darker areas of the field, like the subway or whatever. But it may be sort of like a game time decision, like it's on my kit and I just slap it on if I need it.
That checks.
But yeah, it's not. It's good to have, but I don't. It's not for us. It's not very true. I mean, I may go to the indoor sometime and use it there. I don't know, but
yeah, no, legit.
Odds of me going to the indoor are pretty slim.
Yeah, I mean, if we end up putting a shorter barrel in your gun, maybe it'd be a fun place to go see how you feel about that kind of thing. But yeah, that makes sense. So how'd you end up feeling about the flat pack? I know you were talking earlier tonight about, maybe thinking about other ways of storing your tank, placing your tank.
Yeah, I like it. Now, to be clear, like this is not a legit flat pack. It's we have flat pack at home, and totally. It is great value flat pack.
Malord's finest, cheapest flat pack.
So there's a couple of things. I mean, I definitely don't dislike it. I put on custom shoulder pads just because I found that the flat pack shoulder pads were just too like square, so they were just digging into my shoulders. I didn't find that very comfortable. So I put those on there. And then the other thing is like the buckles and stuff, because we have flat pack at home or shitty and someone has already broken. So I'm thinking about either getting a real one, which is very expensive, or just temporarily putting in like a good quality buckle in place of the crappy buckle that used to be there.
Yeah,
and that's the buckle that goes across your sternum. And that's important because I found that when that's not in place, the shoulder pads the shoulder straps tend to slip off my person. So just having it buckled in the front makes it good. That being said, I don't notice it's there. So it's small, it's convenient. I have foam on the inside of the pack to pad in the tank, so I don't feel it digging into my back or anything like that.
Good.
It provides a little bit of like utility, like you can transport a couple of things. So like when we did the last game of the year a few weeks ago, I had like my winter whites stuffed in there.
Yeah.
Um,
I know it's
so
like a little smaller and lighter than the one I'm running. But
yes,
like also Sasquatch.
Yeah. It's expandable. You can make it bigger. Like it's a nice replica pack. Like there's nothing wrong with it. But yeah, like I definitely, as a proof of concept, like my thought initially was to have it clip directly into my chest rig, which I stopped doing because the weight of the pack would drag it down. Like I would have to have some sort of system where the bottom of the chest rig would connect to like my belt and keep it all in place like that. But that seems like a lot of rigging together and makes it just adds more complexity, and like it makes it hard for me to take it off and all this kind of stuff.
I feel that might partly be like a airsoft mags way less than real mags problem. Like,
well, I mean, even if that were the case, like, I mean, like it's just a gravity thing, right? Like you have this big thing on your back that's dangling off the front, whereas something on the front that is lighter but smaller, so it's naturally going to sort of shift.
Yep, that makes sense.
So yeah, so there's a bunch of that. That being said, like I'm still fine with it. Like I have no issues with it. I don't think about it when it's on my person. Unless I forget to buckle the sternum strap, in which case it sort of slides a little bit. There's been some other good suggestions. Well, yeah, definitely, no question.
Helpful.
There's been some suggestions as well in Discord from like Ambo and a few other people of like how I could rig it differently, like using an H harness or what have you. So I'm gonna play around with it. I'm gonna see about borrowing some of John's kit over the winter and seeing like what I like and what could work. But yeah, like I mean, it's not like I need an excuse to buy more kit. But if I can make whatever I have working, whatever I have already work better. I have a different pack as well that I had bought initially before I got the flat pack, which is it's like a hydration carrier.
Oh, yeah.
I may use that instead. It's a little bit smaller. But we'll see. I think there's a lot to be said though about adding like comfort stuff to it. Like adding those shoulder pads really did make a big difference in terms of comfort. So I mean, it's the kind of stuff I'm going to keep doing for sure.
Cool. So I also know you recently changed your iPro, based on I think a recommendation from Chaz.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I picked up a set of Pyramex iForce. To sort of tell the full story, like I've been using the exact same model of iPro, the ESS Advancer V12s,
forever, since
like 2008, I believe. They were issued goggles to British forces in Afghanistan and Iraq, I assume. And so at the time in the late aughts and early 2010s, like it was easy to get them. You could get them surplus online you could get the frames pretty cheap, and you could get lens pods, basically like a dime a dozen. But nowadays they're much more expensive to get because they're no longer in production. And so as a consequence of that, now I'm in a situation where I could buy a set of ESS Advancer V12s, or I could buy some new pods, lens pods, but like I'd be spending as much as a set of Oakley M frames or something like that in some cases, which seems kind of stupid.
Yep, that's rough.
Like, so the Pyramex iForce came to the scene because I know that's what Chaz was using, and they're relatively inexpensive. It's like $30 off Amazon, $30 Canadian.
And like Chaz has a pretty solid track record at this point of gear recommendations for us. Like pretty much everything he's suggested has been pretty good.
Yeah. And Pyramex is a real iPro company. It's not like it's Lancer Tactical like making a whatever goggle. It's like this is an iPro company. And so I was like, okay, well, I'll give that a shot and see what that's like. And obviously, there's an adaptation period because I know what my iPro is supposed to feel like because I've been using it for the last X number of years, and it doesn't feel that way. Fair enough. Yep. But there definitely is like ventilation issues that I didn't have with the Advancers that require manual intervention. So as I was talking to Chaz about it, it's like I got to go and I have to cut holes in the foam. Right, I'm gonna have to cut 3 or 4 millimeter foam holes in the foam at the top, at the bottom, and on the side of the lenses if possible to really get as much airflow in there as possible. So Verdict is still out. Honestly, I'm not thrilled about them. I think they don't really fit my face very well. I don't like the way that they fit on my face. I will be trying to shape them a little bit by just like modifying and like heating up, kind of like what they do at like optical stores. You can gently heat the plastic and then form it a bit to your face, and I'll see if that helps the comfort.
That's legit.
But I'm keeping my options open at this point. Like,
yeah, well, I mean,
I know that Jordan. Sorry, go ahead.
You're only in like $30-ish. Like that's not terrible.
Yeah, exactly. More expensive options are like the Pit Vipers that Jordan uses that are a little extra, but I mean the airflow is really good on them. The Oakley M frames that I mentioned, again, the M frame with the Hilo gasket is acceptable for use at our field because it's a full seal. But again, the cost of that is pretty high.
Yeah, they're not cheap.
That being said, like, I wonder if there's similar airsoft replicas that are still acceptable, because I can't imagine that every single person I see who's using a pair of Oakley M frames on the airsoft field shelled out like $150, $200 Canadian for them, right? So I'll have a look, but again, I've got all winter to try and figure that out and come to something that I like. To be honest, I don't hate the PRMX ones. I really don't. It's just from a comfort level and the ventilation level out of the box, it wasn't as nice as what I expected.
That's legit. And like, you know, you have time to tinker with that and try them out for stuff. So
yeah,
see how it goes.
And it's hard. It's hard, man. When you've been using something as long as I use those goggles, it is hard to find a replacement, because either everything won't compare favorably, or in some cases they'll be miles ahead of what you did before. But there's really not a whole lot of middle ground.
Yeah, well, I mean, like talking specifically about the ones you were running, I bought a set and tried them and found them really uncomfortable. But I also have a giant head, so
yeah,
that's a separate problem. And like, legitimately, I'm sitting here as you rattle through these, going, maybe I should try some of those, like just for the sake of trying something new, right? Like the ones that I've been using for ages, the ESS Land Ops, are super comfy, but they're terrible peripheral vision. So like, I'm like, I bought them initially because they fit over all of my glasses, and that was fantastic, but I've had LASIK, so maybe I should think about getting new goggles.
yeah, totally. And you could definitely get away with like shooting glasses in a gasket, right?
Yeah, exactly, right? So things for me to think about too. And this feels like a good point to just sort of give that shout out to the Discord. If you're listening and you're not on the Discord, you probably should be, just because so much great advice and so many different people with lots of experience to draw upon. Highly recommend it. They were making fun of me the other day for, I reply to stuff so infrequently unless I'm directly messaged. They're like, "Oh, Pat has emerged from his cave on the mountainside," because again, I'm a Yeti. And in fairness, they are correct. Both. Look at me. And I like my cave.
Yes.
So, the Discord shout out notwithstanding, a silly question for you, but do you count your Pats killed per season?
No.
That's weird.
I don't count my anything's killed per season, to be completely frank with you. I think
at least I'm not low prio.
Well, that's right. Yeah. No, like, it's funny. I think I've mentioned this maybe on the podcast before. I certainly have talked to people in the community about it. Like, some people like locally on the field will be like, oh, like they'll shoot me and they'll be like, oh, I shot a YouTuber. Great. Okay, awesome. Whatever.
Hooray.
Or some people will come off the field and be like, oh, I have a 3-to-1 kill death ratio today. And I was like, cool. Honestly, I have never, ever purposefully kept track of like how many eliminations did I get this game? How many people did I shoot this game? I will remember how many people I've taken out, how many people have been taken out during a game, obviously. So if we're playing like a death match in the village or whatever, and it's 5-on-5 and 4 people, I will keep track of that because it's important, relevant information. But
how many of them are left?
Well, yeah, exactly. But once it ceases to be useful, I just forget about it. So, you get off the field and they're like, oh, Phil, how many people you shoot that game? I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah,
and then I have to go and I play back the tape in my mind, and I'm like, okay, I shot that guy, and then I went here, and then I shot that guy, and it's like 3, I guess, right?
Yeah, it's data not stored, right? But I mean, mostly I was asking because it just popped into my head to ask if you kept track of how many times you shot me, because it's funny.
Yeah, no, and never. And I mean, to be honest, the other thing too is I'll keep track of stuff if it's like memorable. Like I shot Kirby in the goggles and his goggles broke and flew off his face. Like, yeah, that's
Yeah,
the kind of thing
you'd
that's like,
remember
wow,
that.
that's memorable, right?
Oh.
Um, but we play a lot of games. Games come fast and furious, and yeah, it's not something that it doesn't really serve. So I don't really think about it too much. Also, the cheeky answer is it's hard to keep track of so many things.
That's fair. I'd have to take my my socks off to count high enough. It's understandable.
Yeah.
Rockin'. So that brings me to sort of like the last three questions I have for you, I guess. So we've talked a bunch on the podcast. You've talked to other folks as well about our big events that we've run and about testing new scenarios and stuff.
Mhm.
It's the end of the season. Do you feel like we had a good, successful season?
Definitely. Yeah. I think in many ways, this season has reinvigorated my interest in running airsoft scenarios, running airsoft events. But you know, just like last week when we were or week before, whenever when we were playing the last game of the season, and I was sidelined because I was like my rib hurt and I wanted to run these games and play tests. I actually enjoyed that a lot.
Good.
Like I wasn't playing the game, and don't get me wrong, I would love to play that game. So if any of you are listening and you're local, please run those games for me because I would love to do that. But I did get a lot of enjoyment of watching the game, looking at the players doing certain things, and then also being having sort of the power to just go to someone and be like, hey, go back in and give them hell or whatever. Like it was reinvigorating. It was a different way for me to experience airsoft that I hadn't experienced. We used to do that at Red Cliff all the time. We used to run games, people would sit out, they'd watch, do whatever. And really at Frontline for the last X number of years, it's been just let the ref figure it out. And yes, we consult and they're like, what do you want to play next or whatever, but ultimately it's up to them. So taking the reins back this year a little bit more has been refreshing.
Yeah, I mean,
right.
I think it's been really good to be like, and you in particular have taken a leadership role with our team in this, which is appreciated. But like, it's really good to take ownership of that in terms of like, well, not that we weren't enjoying playing the games that we were playing, because we absolutely were, but just like, hey, can we try some new stuff? What can we do to make this, to keep this fresh for everybody, to give us new experiences? And like, it's really funny to talk to you and have you be like, yeah, like I've been going back to like the old like Red Cliff stuff, right? Like games where people would sit out. Like I did a lot of we did a lot of like rescue the hostage kind of stuff back in the day, and I had a lot of fun being the hostage, right? Like partly because a lot of the time it involved like, okay, so like we've rescued Pat, all right, Pat, here's like a sidearm so that you can participate in the firefight as we're trying to get you to the extraction, and just those ended up being modes of play that I found really fun. And it's neat to see us sort of going, well, okay, so we did these up at Red Cliff. How can we reinvent this to make it work really well and fun for people at Frontline?
Yeah. And to be honest, and I hope people take this lesson too, is that it's hard being the only person coming up with new ideas or putting in effort. And I don't say that on my behalf. In fact, I say that on behalf of mostly Jeff Byrne at Frontline, because for years, Jeff was, I'm going to say, the only person making an effort to come up with new game modes, different things. So he built like this weird payload thing situation for Airsoft that we played with a couple of games, and it was a little bit wacky, to be honest. But it was fun. It was different. We had none, and that was purely his mad genius that put that together, got it off the ground, etc. Right?
And like frankly, also props to him, because that was also his time, sweat, and money. Right, like
exactly.
This
is
a
hard
hobby
when
where,
you're
like, it's really good when people are able and willing to put that in. And like, I'm not suggesting, everyone has to go out and like volunteer your field and build new props and shit. But like, I kind of am actually. The more people who are going, let's try something new, let's create something new, the better it tends to work out.
Yeah, and there's entropy, right? So like if he's doing it and then, or if I'm, so he, he did this for a while, but then he stopped doing it because, not a lot was going on and nobody was really responding to that. But then we ran the op, and then it reinvigorated the idea of like objective based play. We ran a few different games with objective based, sort of like the football game and like the Ascension game, based on stuff that I had talked to Matt Kruger in Colorado about. And then he came back and he's like, "Oh, I've got this other bomb game, which like it's like bomb props and this, that, the other thing." It's like, cool, let's try that. And then we're doing this game and then we're doing other stuff. And like it makes it easier for people to come up with new ideas when people around them are coming up with ideas too. There's a saying in my line of work. Sorry. So there's a saying in my line of work that I use in like brainstorming sessions and workshops all the time, which is that the best way to have a good idea is to have lots of ideas.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
it takes some of that like, oh man, is everyone going to be like, "Oh, you're an idiot" when I say this? Like if everyone's spitballing, it takes some of the threat of that, the fear of that, the concern about that away, which is awesome. Right.
Yeah. So I think when I think back to this season, I think that's one of the success stories, is definitely creating that sense of interest in objective based play again, not just like Plasto Blasto, which is fine, but creating that, and then also creating the sense of empowerment within people in the community to say, like, listen, it doesn't just have to be frontline staff. It can be members of the community. And if you have an idea for a game, that not just an idea of like, oh, I want to play D-Day, but like if there's something that you think might be cool, or some modification to a game mode that you think might be interesting, shout it out and we'll give it a go. And I think it's been successful more often than not this year, for sure.
One of the things that like, one of the things that I love, just because it's just so far out of left field for me, because like Phil, like I'm a complicated plans and overthinking it kind of guy too much of the time. Is just like he rattled off the football game, and I was like, that sounds awesome. What does it require? A $20 football. Okay. Awesome. Right? Like not every idea for a new game mode costs a whole lot of money, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So just sort of the creativity piece is the important piece, and sometimes I don't remember that as well as I would like to. So that was a takeaway for me from that, right? And like just it's been a lot of fun. So next to last question for this evening is I want to talk to you about, so like, how's the Iron Horse prep going? I mean, you told me last episode, to my surprise, that it had been moved to June.
Yeah.
So I guess you're like not as in a rush about like getting stuff together for it or anything. But have you talked about the idea or thought about like, are you going to borrow some of our spare comms? Are you allowed to bring radios with you?
Great question.
Are you going to be, I know you're borrowing gear from folks on site. Is there anything that you like want to bum from anyone on our team in terms of kit?
Yeah, so John and I have been talking about it. I don't know, like it's still up in the air what the kit is going to look like. Am I going to do a belt kit? Am I going to do a chest rig? I don't really know. The rules of the road for Iron Horse are very much like you're allowed 7 max, 6 plus 1, right? Which I'm told is 7. I'm not strong enough, but yeah. So you get 6 plus 1, and
4?
All of the people who've played Iron Horse before are very much like, listen, carry all you need is mags, water, and your replica. That's it, and maybe comms and iPro, obviously. But like really, that's all you need. You don't need to be carrying anything fancy. You don't, you can take snacks with you if you want. Fundamentally, everything can stay in your fob bag. So originally I was thinking that I'd probably be carrying way more stuff than I'm going to end up carrying. It's really going to be lightweight. It's going to be figuring out how I stay as lightweight as possible, and set myself up for success. So I think some of the key challenges right now is, do I want a hydration pack? And if so, how do I juggle that with an HPA tank in my back, right? Do I want my HPA tank on my belt and then a hydration pack on the back? And am I going to use an Alice system with an or like the suspenders to make that, like all these types of questions? Those are things that I need to really evaluate this winter. And I think the Iron Horse prep, when it was going to be in February or whenever, was fine. Now that it's in June, it's gotten, in my opinion, vastly more complicated because the heat is something that we need to contend with.
What's the temperature?
It's hot. It's hot. Like it's like mid 30s, humidity like 80%. Like it's hot,
Yeah,
right?
that is tough on Arctic
So
creatures like us.
and like it's fine for me when I go to Mexico at that time of year, but I'm not wearing a full suit of tack gear and like exerting myself for 6 hours at a time. I'm going to the beach in his shorts and probably tarps off in flip flops with a coconut in my hand or a beer or perhaps both.
I was gonna say the
So
swim up bar is not like high energy.
yeah, it's not high energy, and yes, it's hot, but like you're cooling off constantly. I had a taste of like a heat and exertion when I did my marathon at the end of this year, at the end of the summer this year. And like it requires a lot of hydration. You're talking about like a liter an hour in some cases, plus electrolytes. And yeah, so you don't want to be carrying extra kit. And a lot of the things that you might do to cool down, like not wear a helmet, I'm gonna wear a helmet because I would need GoPro footage. Like all these kinds of things make it more complicated, and just some things to consider and make sure that I'm listening to the experts who are from there and see sort of what they're doing or what they would do in that situation.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
To maximize, because to be honest, like I'm not really concerned about like the personal skills, not really concerned about the tactics. I'm really excited about potentially taking on an additional role of the RTO for the squad lead, which would be great. And those are all things I can learn. What I can't learn is how to adapt my body to the heat without actually being in the heat, right? So that's the part that is
Yeah, and it's not like June here is super warm.
Exactly, right? If it's anything like last year, like the warmest day of the year up until that, the warmest day of the year was June 26th or something. So like that's not even, that's after Iron Horse. Like I'd be coming back to warmer temps. Like so it's going to be a challenge, but it's not something that I'm like scared of, but it's definitely some things to consider, and see. Like once we get down to the States too, like there'll be perhaps accessibility for us to buy different hydration carriers and stuff. I don't really know, but those are things that I'm going to be
I know
at.
I know from the Christmas party that you and John are both excited to go take advantage of like being in a place with multiple like easily accessible surplus stores. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm like,
yeah. So where we're going a little bit early, and I'm not going to dox myself, but we're going a little bit early to go to Fort Benning, which is in Columbus, Georgia, which is where the National Infantry Museum is. We're going to be there in one of the mornings so that we can see like a graduation, which would be kind of cool.
That is right.
And then spend the day at the Infantry Museum, which of course is going to be super rad.
Oh, and
but
John
they have a whole
just in his glee.
Oh my god, he'll be in his glee. But they have a whole street in Columbus called Victory Drive, I think, aptly named. And it's just basically surplus store on surplus store on surplus store. And not just surplus store, but like military equipment store. So if you're a recruit at Fort Benning and you need to go buy something that is military-esque, presumably you can go to one of these stores and buy it, like Ranger stores and all kinds of stuff. So we'll be checking those out and seeing what we can find that may be applicable. Our official camo for the event is Desert Combat Uniform, DCU, so 3-color desert top and then tan bottoms. But that doesn't mean that if we come across a cool like Desert Tiger or Chalky Chip or something like that, like we might end up picking some up because we love that kind of stuff. And there's John and I were talking just randomly about how like when it comes to real world issued stuff, it has this distinct look or quality to it that replica gear just can't get.
Yeah.
And you don't know what it is. Like I don't know if it's like a salty factor or whatever, but it just has this look,
Yep, I do.
And so yeah, that's what we're excited to sink our teeth into for sure.
That is righteous. So yeah, my last question is: do you have any suggestions for me in like going towards in the 5 months of downtime now, like other than do your ready ups, what any kit suggestions, any training suggestions?
Yeah, I mean that's a very valid question, and I think understanding that your primary, well, firstly your M27 is flawless, so there's no notes,
yeah,
right?
Does the thing, checks the box, carrying on.
Yeah, your 249 I haven't really seen in action, but I know from what you're saying that the it's up and running. So that's great. I think fundamentally, my number one recommendation is don't spend money on useless bullshit that you don't need, because you have everything you
Read
need
as,
right
don't
now.
buy more guns, Pat.
Well, don't buy more guns. Don't overthink it on gear. Like, everything you've got is serving,
That's true. Yeah.
right? And it's serving and it's serving, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I mean,
Like,
there's nothing that I own
it's
that's not doing its job and doing it well, I think, at this point.
correct. Yeah. And so I think that the the thing I would say is, like, be satisfied with where you are right now, and then just look to, okay, what are other things that I can do that are ancillary or provide a support, you know? And in your case, I mean, we've talked about it a little bit. Um, Making sure that you're fit and healthy is important,
Yep.
right? And that's just good advice in general, whether you play Airsoft or not, obviously. You know, going for a stupid walk for your stupid mental health, like, all that kind of stuff is important for
If
sure.
you've seen the cranky eagle doing that in the rain, that's me. I am him.
Yeah. But, like, so I think ultimately, I think my advice would be, like, be satisfied and be okay with being like, I don't need to do anything right now, right? Um, I think that would be my biggest thing, because I know that you have this idle tendency about you, where it's like, oh, I want to pick something else up, or I want to do this, or I want to do that, but you're doing great. I think, you know, you sell that Scorpion, and you know, get a holster for the PX4 so that you can actually field it, and by field it, I mean bring it to the field, not use it and come home with it,
I mean,
because that is the sidearms lot in life.
hey man, like the one game in 30 that you actually use it is, I feel like it's worth having. Like, I mean, we've discussed before, like, do you need to buy a sidearm? No. Do I like them?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I ran my pistol dry for the first time this year in a game.
Right? Like,
right. But that's the first time in, like, I don't know how many years. No, but seriously, I think it's good advice for a lot of people. Like, yeah, if you want new things because they're shiny and stuff, it's fine. But I think you're in a really good place, and I think it's okay to be okay with that.
Yeah. No.
And focusing your energy, as far as it relates to Airsoft, on stuff that makes you happy. Like, I mean, whether that's, you know, collecting bits and bobs, whatever, fine. But keeps you, you know, your head in the game, and keeps you happy. And if that means that you don't do ready ups, like, I mean, you know, we talk about it all the time, but, like, if you're like, oh, doing these ready ups is bring me down, don't do them. Like, it's fine, right?
Totally. You know, and I mean, I do get satisfaction out of doing them. With the, it's weird. I get satisfaction out of doing them with both the 249 and the M27, but the 249 mostly because it's like, this is like,
Yeah.
this is slowly improving the steadiness of my arms because it is a chunk. You know.
Yeah.
But, like, and honestly, with the M27, because it's just satisfying. You know.
Yeah. But yeah, man, I think we're ending the year on a good note. I'm thrilled with where you are. We'll get my stuff sorted. I don't really need help. I just need company, as we talked about,
and, like,
privately.
And, like, it's so hard to convince me to come hang out.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I think we're setting ourselves up for a good year next year. That's for sure.
Me too. I didn't get to play as much as I would like because of the health stuff, but, like, I'm chuffed with how this year went. We had really good scenario games. People had a lot of fun. We had fun designing them and running them and poking at them. You know, like, yeah, just ending on a high note.
Yeah, man.
Well, those are my questions. So I will wish you, on behalf of myself and on behalf of the team and the Discord community, a happy birthday.
Thank you very much.
And thanks for tuning in, folks. We will talk to you next week when you will resume your regular host instead of me.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.